Hello, I'm D.E. Ellis, and I'm the author of the book, The Last Monkey is the One Who Drowns. I'm here today to talk to you about Cuba. You may say, why is this crazy American lady talking to me about Cuba? Well, I've been involved with Cuba for about the past 20 years. The book I wrote is largely about Cuba. It tells the story of the Cuban Revolution and what happened, exactly all the historical details, well, maybe not all, but a lot. Everything you need to know, and the true story of one man who was in the resistance and was arrested by Castro. And I have friends that I dearly love in Cuba. I've been to Cuba several times, and we do have a contact in Cuba who's been getting with us this week to keep us in touch with things that are happening on the island. They've been able, in spite of the fact that the Cuban government shut down the internet after the July 11th protest and continuing protests, these people found a way around the government blockade of the internet and have been able to keep in contact with us. So we're able to find out things that are happening on the island. So I want to share some with you. So just to start, why are the people protesting in Cuba? Well, how would you like to pay $300 for 30 eggs? Or $2,000 for a box of 22 pieces of chicken? Or $1,750 for 6 azithromycin tablets? These are prices that our contact had to pay last week. Cuba is a mess right now. And if you listen to many of the loud voices in the United States, they'll say, oh, it's all the fault of the United States. It's the embargo, blah, 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 blah. Well, we're going to talk about some geeky numbers about the embargo today, and then you can decide for yourself. But the Cuban people have determined that it's not the embargo. In fact, I'm seeing posts all over what I'm looking at from people in Cuba who are stating this is not the fault of the embargo. In fact, after there was the demonstration, the Cuban government opened up some of their storehouses and allowed some food and necessities to come to the people. And so the people are saying things like, wow, you mean the blockade just disappeared this week so food came? No, it was controlled by the Cuban government. Another thing they're saying is, wow, what a rare blockade that you're allowed to build luxury hotels and fancy things for the government officials, but the people's houses are falling in, and you're able to buy all these police cars, but you have no money for ambulances. So the people are seeing through the facade. They lived through years and years of Fidel Castro, then years of his brother Raul Castro, and then Raul retired and he appointed this new leader. The people aren't really thrilled about him either. Here's a couple of sentiments about him. So let's talk a little bit about numbers. I've been looking at the census.gov website so I could get some numbers of what exactly the United States has sent to Cuba in the past 20 years. And you might be surprised to know that even though they claim there's a blockade, it hasn't been a blockade since the Cuban Missile Crisis. But even though the Cuban government claims it's a blockade, the United States has sent $8,191,200,000 worth of exports to Cuba. All right? Well, let's compare that to some other countries. Past 20 years with Iran. We have sanctions on Iran too, okay? Iran's only gotten $3,860,700,000 worth of exports. Well, that's kind of interesting because in 2019, Cuba had 11.33 million people. Iran had 82.91 million people. So that's kind of out of balance, isn't it? So then I also compared it to a country that has about the same GDP as Cuba. Cuba was listed as having $100 billion US GDP. Okay? Well, Slovakia, which is a beautiful little place, Slovakia used to be communist, but overthrew their communist rulers, and now they have 105.1 billion in GDP, really similar to Cuba, but they've only received $6,2,700,000 in U.S. exports. So how are they making it? What are they doing to make it? Because they've only received this much from the United States. Sorry, being dramatic. But seriously, if little Slovakia can do it, Cuba, with all the richness of their island, can do it.
Because the fundamental question being put to us is, so the people of Cuba are suffering. The people of Cuba are going through a difficult economic time. I would argue that they've done so for 62 years. Why don't we get rid of the embargo? It would make life easier for them. And I want to address it. I want to address it especially to those that are not as familiar with this issue. First of all, let me begin by saying there are no American ships blockading Cuba, surrounding the island of Cuba. In fact, Cuba, frankly, does not have an embargo in the way people think. Cuba trades with the whole world. For example, Cuba every year exports $1.2 billion, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a lot for an island of 11 million people, okay? They export $461 million to China, $127 million to Spain, $65 million to the Netherlands, $64 million to Germany. This is not a country that's isolated. They trade with every country in the world. They export $5.3 billion a year. With Spain alone, they import, $1 billion from Spain. Another $790 million from China, $327 million from Italy, $285 million from Canada and from Russia. So they import over $5 billion, they export over $1.2 billion. Cuba is not isolated. They trade with every country. This regime trades with virtually every country on the planet. You know who else they trade with? The United States of America. Cuba trades with the United States of America. They import almost $280 million a year, almost as much as they do with Canada and Russia. And no one accuses Canada and Russia of having a blockade on Cuba. 66% of the chicken that's eaten in Cuba, which is the staple protein in Cuba, comes from the United States. Half their soybeans come from the United States. There is only one blockade in Cuba, and it is the blockade that this regime has imposed on its people. Now, yesterday, the president announced, or the White House announced, they're going to stand up some remittances group to try to figure out how do we make it easier for relatives to send money to their relatives on the island of Cuba. Well, that work group is going to not have a long time to meet. They're not going to have to meet for very long because U.S. law allows that now. It is not illegal to send money to your relatives in Cuba. The only thing that's prohibited is you can't send the money through this bank that the Cuban military set up in Panama. That's the only thing that's prohibited. And to the extent money can't reach the people of Cuba is because they refuse to allow anyone other than that bank to do these remittances. And by the way, they've prohibited depositing dollars. Here's how it works for them. You send your relative $100, they take 10% of it, then they take the dollars, they don't let them deposit it, they pocket the dollars, and they give them this worthless Cuban currency. So they have the dollars, so they can buy things for themselves and on the global market. So the blockade, to the extent that there's something that's preventing remittances directly to the Cuban people, it's not U.S. policy, it's regime policy. They're the ones that need a work group. How about this argument that there's a blockade on travel? If only more American tourists could go to Cuba. By the way, Cuba's already filled with Canadian tourists and Italian tourists that enjoy five-star accommodations. And I'll be frank, many of them go there, these sick, disgusting men that go there to hook up with a 16 or 17-year-old girl. But that said, they talk about travel to Cuba. Well, let me tell you something. Travel's allowed now. An American can go to Cuba. You just can't stay at a military-owned hotel or eat at a military-owned restaurant or shop at a military-owned store. You can stay at the private homes of people that rent them out on Airbnb. You can do that. You can eat at a restaurant that's owned by a private person. You can shop at stores that are owned by private people. The reason why they have nowhere to stay, nowhere to eat, and nowhere to shop is not U.S. policy. It's that the Cuban regime won't allow privately owned hotels, privately owned shops, privately owned stores. They won't allow it, privately owned restaurants. They're the ones that have a blockade on travel, not the United States. What about medicine? That's another thing they put out there. This is so cruel. We don't allow medicine in. Do you know what the Cuban regime announced last week? This is what they announced on their national television. We are going to lift the ban on the importation of medicine. What? You mean there was a Cuban ban, a regime ban on importing medicine? Yes, there was. They're the ones that weren't allowing medicine in. And to the amount they were allowing it in, they were putting a tariff on it. So there's no blockade on medicine. We sell the medicine. And you can donate medicine, unlimited amounts under U.S. law. If there's a blockade on medicine, it's the regime's blockade. The other one I hear is the internet. I support the internet. Why don't we allow, I heard somebody say this to me yesterday, why don't we allow American companies to go and provide internet? Then they would have internet. It's the embargo. And these people don't know what they're talking about. They literally are just parroting stupid, ridiculous talking points. Because the law on the U.S. and trade with Cuba specifically exempts telecoms. AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, every American telecom can go into Cuba tomorrow and offer phone and internet service. You know why they can't? Not our law. It's the Cuban regime because they want to control that. And you see a pattern here. Blockade on travel, blockade on private ownership of business, blockade on bringing in medicine, blockade on bringing in money. Why? Because the Cuban regime wants to control people. They don't want an individual Cuban to have a paycheck that they earn for themselves. They want what little you have to come from them, because if you don't do what they tell you, they can take it from you. That's what they want. They don't want you to have internet companies offered by AT&T and Sprint and Verizon and anybody else, because they want to be able to shut it off when you're saying things they don't like and things against them. Same with medicine. They use all of these things as a tool. It's hard to fathom because we live here, but they use all of it as a tool. You want medicine? Are you posting stuff on the internet? Are you saying things against the regime? Are you speaking out? Are you not participating in these acts of repudiation that we force people to do? Because if you don't, you're not going to get your medicine. And they certainly don't want the cash flowing around. They don't want independent ownership. They don't want the people of Cuba to have liberty. This is all about control. All about control. And by the way, in the law that codified the embargo, it has a clause that automatically triggers the end of the embargo. And you want to know what this tough standard is that's in the law? Free the political prisoners, free press, free and fair elections, multi-party elections. The regime does those three things, the embargo ends automatically. Automatically. There is no embargo on Cuba. There is an embargo on the Cuban regime, an embargo on the companies they own. Because what they wanted to do is they wanted to take the Obama opening, funnel all that money through their companies. People say their Spanish companies own hotels. They don't own the hotels in Cuba. The regime owns the hotels. These hotel chains that open in Cuba on the beaches, they don't even pay their employees. They pay the Cuban government. The Cuban government pays the employees. Control. So the bottom line is this. Anybody who stands up and says there's an embargo, there's a blockade by the United States and it's cruel and it's causing all these policies is one of two things. They don't know what they're talking about and they're just parroting some talking point, or they're liars. That's the only two options. This is not about an embargo. The people of Cuba did not take to the streets, did not have their head cracked open, did not have their kids arrested and put in jail. Mothers who tomorrow plan to march in Cuba because they don't know where their children are. Arrested, they don't know where their kids are. They broke into homes, they grabbed 16-year-old boys, they gave them a bat, they said you're going halfway across the country to beat people up in the street. They didn't stand up against all those things because of an embargo or because they wanted remittances. They stood up because they wanted liberty. Libertad. That's what they wanted. That's what they're telling us. Why don't we listen to them? They told us what they want. They want libertad. They want liberty. And if there are any people on this earth that should understand that, it should be Americans.
It's interesting because Fidel Castro, in 1962, said that in 10 years, Cuba was going to be more prosperous than the United States. Well, I don't think he's a very good prophet. What do you think? Right now, since COVID, things have gotten worse. And it's not because of the United States. It's because the Cuban economy had been basing themselves on tourism. And obviously with COVID, tourism has pretty much shut down. So the government doesn't have their source of income. They have also been relying greatly on the people that have relatives in the United States that send money. So when things cost more, then the United States relatives have to send more money, don't they? It is that way. The Cuban people have been suffering through indignities. This week, the contact that we have stated that they have 3 hours electricity per day. Now, how are you going to refrigerate your food on 3 hours of electricity per day? That's a recipe for food poisoning. They have 3 hours of water per day. Try to bathe, try to wash your clothes, try to cook. Currently, they're not supposed to leave their house because the government says COVID, they're going to get COVID. Well, I have a suspicion that it's not really COVID, that it's more the protesters, that they want to control them so they can't go places because of the protesters. We did find out that the people are being made to stay in their own municipality. So Antonio has a niece that had some food, but his sister and his brother and his other sister a mile away didn't have much food. Well, the niece that lives over here was not able to come over here to bring food to her aunts and uncle because it's a different municipality and the government wouldn't let her go a mile to take food to her family. But supposedly the people are protesting because of the United States. And as far as the Cuban healthcare system, we were really concerned about Antonio's brother 2 weeks ago before all the protests started, because not only do they have a COVID outbreak in Cuba, they have dengue. I don't know if you've ever heard of dengue. There is a chapter about dengue in my book, so you can learn about it if you'd like. It's a mosquito-borne illness that's horrible, that makes you feel like you're dying and sometimes kills you. The worst form of it is hemorrhagic dengue, and that is what Antonio's brother had. And he was actually bleeding out his eyeballs. He was very, very ill. And there was no way to get him to where he could get treatment until he was almost dead. Okay? They finally found an ambulance to take him the 2 hours that it was going to take to get him to where he could get treatment because the local hospital didn't have anything to treat him with. And they gave him plasma, and it did revive him, so he was doing better. But then there was not any ambulance to take him back from there to his hometown until somebody in his hometown got sick enough that they had to transport the next person there. Really? So then they finally got him back. And then this week, during the midst of all the protests, he ran up a fever of 104. So at this point, they couldn't take him the 2 hours, so they took him to the local hospital. The local hospital said, well, we think that he has pneumonia, but our x-ray machine is broken, so we can't take an x-ray to determine how bad it is. And furthermore, we don't have any medicine. So basically, they sent him home for whatever. They told him he didn't have COVID. They did a rapid test, said he didn't have COVID. God knows if that was the case, but anyway, they sent him home, and we sent out word for prayer warriors for people to pray for him. And in the meantime, his youngest sister also got sick, and so we prayed for her, and both of them are doing better, thank God. God has intervened. It's not because of the Cuban healthcare system. It's because God intervened on their behalf and helped them, and they're getting better. But can you imagine having 104 fever? You only have 3 hours of electricity a day, 3 hours of water a day, and no food. So the people are unhappy. And it's not, well, the older people have always been unhappy with the system, but they've been afraid of the system. Whereas the young people, they've grown up with this, they've never known anything else, but now they were allowed to have the internet, and they've discovered through the internet that other people live differently, and they don't think it's fair that they have to live this way. Understandable. So there's a lot of young people who are in the streets and have YouTube channels that are protesting against it, and there's a group that wrote a song, and I'm going to let Antonio tell you all about this song.
Most of the people here in Washington, and frankly, most of the people in the country, do not pay attention to Cuba on a daily basis. I get it, I really do. But if you're not following the issue of Cuba, you can be forgiven for not knowing that what we're seeing, what we saw yesterday, what we're seeing today, what's happened recently, none of this was started by politicians. Wasn't started by me. Wasn't started by anybody in Miami or in Florida. Wasn't started by any think tank in Washington. Wasn't even started by political activists inside of Cuba. You know who started what's happening in Cuba? Artists, poets, songwriters, writers, actors, musicians. They're the ones who started it. The San Isidro movement. Because they came after them. And there's a song, a lot of people don't realize that there was a song that came out earlier this year. A song that, by the way, if you play in Cuba, you will go to jail. The song's name is Patria y Vida. Now, the slogan of the Cuban regime is Patria o Muerte, meaning fatherland or death. This song played on that. It says Patria y Vida, which means fatherland and life, instead of fatherland or death. And the song is extraordinarily powerful because it was written by people and sang by people who have lived this reality and are living this reality. So powerful that, as I said, you'll go to jail in Cuba if you play it. What the song basically says in its lyrics is, why can't people think different ways and not be treated as enemies? Why is life so good for party insiders and their families, but there's no food for average Cubans? Seems to be no embargo for the Cuban regime and their family members. Why can you build luxury hotels while our homes are crumbling? Why do Cubans have to suffer the indignities? The indignities of simple things like not being able to bathe with soap, not being able to use deodorant, not having toothpaste. Why do they have to deal with these indignities? And the song also asks, who told the regime that Cuba belongs to them and only them? Shouldn't it belong to all 13 million Cubans? The chorus, I'll read first in English and then I'll translate it in Spanish, because it actually plays on the dominoes. Dominoes is a very popular game played by Cubans, played by everybody, but Cubans in particular. It's a big game there. The chorus reads, se acabó, tu 5-9, yo doble 2. Ya se acabó, 60 años, trancado el dominó. And how it translates, it says, it's over. You're 59, meaning 1959, the year the Castro took over, but I have double twos. And everyone knows that if in the domino game, if at the end of the chain, both dominoes, no one has any dominoes left to put down, the game gets locked. And you count numbers, you count dots, to see who won. So it says, it's over. You're 59, but I have double twos. It's over. 60 years with the domino game locked up for us. Now, I know this is a very colloquial Cuban way of expressing it, but this is incredibly powerful. People in Cuba understood what that means. And that means that all this ideology, all this stuff they talk about, all these lies of the regime work out really well for them. People don't believe it anymore, and they're not afraid anymore. Meanwhile, their lives are ruined. Young people in Cuba, artists in Cuba, who realize that the only country on this planet where Cubans are not successful is Cuba. And they're tired of it. And we should stand with them. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
It is sad that a country have to be subject to such a discrimination and torture. it's hard to put in perspective 62 years of slavery, and we got to call it like it is, and I normally do that all the time. But what he's saying is that the song goes like, we just stop screaming out on top of our long Patria o Muerte, which I already explained. Now they call Patria y Vida. They're trying to rebuild something that they started with their own hands, but now it was being destroyed, and blood has been scattered all over the place because just think different than they do. Imagine this. If we disagree about something, anything, we can talk about it. But when you have a weapon in your hands and trying to dialogue with me, and you show me your pistol and put it in front of me, it's like saying, you know, you go my way or else.
Well, you've had that done to you by Cuban military.
Well, yes, indeed. Sometimes when I talk about it, I can feel the pistol stuck on my ribs, and that was when Bay Peak took place, and I was yanked out of my apartment and taken to a sport arena, and from there they transport me on buses. It took me to a concentration camp. And like me, thousands of people were arrested and places in different concentration camps.
Yes, and just this week, we heard that 5,000 people were arrested. Now that's through, what do you call, Radio Bemba?
Yeah, I
Which
call it.
is the Lips radio. So we don't have official Cuban government confirmation of this, but official Cuban government confirmation isn't going to confirm anything about who they've arrested, who they've killed, and who they've beaten.
You know, we have pictures coming from a special. How would I say this? Special. We have people in Cuba to giving us information, credible information, and there are pictures. And you know what? It reminds me that when I was arrested, they have urban buses lined up to take us from that sport arena to this concentration camp. And guess what? That's exactly what they have today in Cuba. Urban transportation, and you know what? They also have the luxury buses they used to have to transport people from the airports to these fancy hotels on the Outer Bank. We have pictures of these luxury buses, and they use it right now as we speak to transport, the same way they did to me, to transport dissidents, people that have a different opinion than they do. So continue to be the theme of these brave Cubans that they have nothing to eat. They just plain and simple have nothing to eat. Let me explain something to you. This way you'll get it. Imagine that you are a president of a country. Let's say Cuba. Let's say that you, whoever you are a president of Cuba. How in the world are you going to keep on your side Marines, Navy, Air Force, police on your side if you don't feed them? So what they have done is create huge warehouses, and they maintain in there all kinds of beef and products to keep these different branches of soldiers and feed them. They have to feed them. If you don't feed your soldier, you're dead. Plain and simple. And what they have done is to just release some of this food throughout the island, just to kind of pacify the outrage of the Cuban people for not having nothing to eat. But you know what? That's not what they want. They've been without food for 62 years, okay? So basically, another type of analogy. They're just like an IV. You've been fed, you continue to breathe, you continue to talk, you continue to, but you're just on IV for 62 years. There were some ups and downs, more down than up, but that's basically what it is. So it's hard for me to try to translate the real meaning of the song because I cannot express myself properly in English. But
One of the things that these guys said was, something about, who told you that Cuba was yours?
Well, yeah.
My Cuba is for all of the people.
Well, it's like, who told you that Cuba is yours?
Mm-hmm.
I want to know who owns Cuba. And the answer to that question was, I just wanted to know, to find out who is the owner so they can fix the potholes on the street.
Yeah, that was one of the things that was said on the internet, who's the owner of Cuba so they can come fix the potholes of the street. We have some other things. The people of Cuba have really been expressing themselves this week, and the ones that are able to get through the internet blockade.
Wait a minute. I can
What's
express
that?
myself because, you know what? My sister, used to be a huge family, and all been dying due to this miserable condition they live in. But you know what? The infrastructure of the village that I was born in, the infrastructure is so bad that when they began to suffer financial situation in the country, they have no divisas, they allowed the drainage, the sewer, to be clogged up. So instead, they just make trench alongside the curb for the black waters to go down the stream and go into the shore of the beach. So imagine, put yourself in that situation in which you have larvae, mosquitoes, frogs, land crab crawling on the walls.
So the open sewers that are going in front of the house, when there's a big rain from a storm, there's a lot of hurricanes, tropical storms come through there. When a big storm comes, then it just floods all of the sewage up to the house and everywhere. And as a matter of fact, the last time that I went to Cuba, I came down with 2 communicable diseases.
Mm-hmm.
Horrible diarrhea, very sick. When I came home, the doctor did testing, gave me IVs to try and get me back. But I had campylobacteriosis and blastocystis. I'd never ever heard of those before, but I got them in Cuba. And the people live with that every day.
Day in and day out. That's a fact.
So because of that, the Cuban people are speaking out. And I want to just share with you some of the things that this young man, now he gave his name and his photo, so he was fearless in telling his information, but I don't really want to give his name. I just want to tell his opinions.
The same thing happened with our book.
Yeah.
You know.
So he said that the blockade does not prohibit the fishermen in Cuba from fishing, but the dictatorship does.
Exactly.
Okay, so this one, they're in Spanish, so I have to translate this. The blockade does not stop the farmers from planting things. Is that correct?
Yeah.
But the dictatorship does. The blockade doesn't prohibit Cubans in the island from having free businesses.
Entrepreneur, yeah.
Mm-hmm. But the dictatorship does. It didn't destroy the sugar mills. What's that? The textiles?
Textile.
Shoe factories. What is this one?
Canned products.
Canned goods. The dictatorship did. The blockade is not responsible that the Cuban people, So look, before we say this, we have to tell you this. There are 3 currencies on the island. There are Cuban pesos, which are basically pretty much worthless. That's what the people
It
get
is
paid.
worthless.
Yeah. There's what you call CUC, C-U-C. That's what tourists have to come and get their money changed into. And supposedly, a CUC is worth $1. That's supposedly what it is. But then also, there's the American dollar. So this young man from the island says that the blockade is not responsible, that they're paid in pesos, but the stores are selling things in dollars. So, how do you buy things? All right, so this one, que les den palos y...
Yeah.
Okay, so talk about this one.
Yeah, the people who protest, they break their head with pieces of wood or baseball bat, and then put them in jail, and because they just think different than they do. I mean, give me a break. Different than they do, over 60 years.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
It says the blockade isn't responsible for...
hundreds of people, political people that to think different than they do, and the political aspect of it.
political prisoners.
So that's not a crime, but they do get arrested and beat up.
All right, so this one's also about the money. It says the blockade is not responsible, that you send dollars, American dollars, and what?
They hand it through the Western Union,
Uh-huh. And they get pesos or CUCs. And
which is a piece of trash.
that's what the show says, it's a piece of trash. Okay, the blockade is not responsible for the dictatorship constructing hotels, and the Cubans hurt their heads. What's that?
They use the money, any money that comes to them by doing this type of money exchange, which was a mistake. They can make hotels and do all kinds of huge restaurants, especially in the Outer Bank, where they take people there in these luxury buses.
But the Cuban people aren't allowed to go there, right?
No.
All right, the blockade's not responsible for the hospitals being disgusting. The blockade's not responsible that there's no water in the houses because the aqueducts haven't been maintained.
And the water is contaminated.
And the
with
water's
sewer.
contaminated, that's right. So, this young man says that he believes that there is a blockade, but it's an internal blockade. So we just wanted to share a few things that the young man says that the spirit of Fidel Castro is still alive, and is still alive.
In each scramble, in each crumble.
In each house that's falling down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See,
Okay.
the thing is.
We're showing pictures of those, so you don't have to explain it. We're gonna show pictures of those.
Oh, thank you.
What's this?
See, in each line that you make, you have to make a line. Let me explain you a little bit about this. The way they doing this, and this is the latest. You have to be up like 3 o'clock in the morning to make lines in whichever store they decide to open up for food, regardless of what kind of food. Nobody knows what you're gonna get. So you gotta make a line. You get your stuff, and you have to go back home and go inside the house, and you gotta stay inside the house from 3 p.m. until the next day at 3 o'clock in the morning, so you can go out and try to find out something to buy.
Well, I mean, that's during COVID, but during regular you have that. I remember the last time that you were there and your brother couldn't come see you the first day that you were there because he was making a line for potatoes, because there hadn't been potatoes in the town for what, 2 months? And so a truck of potatoes came and he had to stand in line all day to get a bag of potatoes for his family and couldn't come see his brother who'd come to visit from the United States because he needed food. That's the kind of system they have here.
See, they get a truck loaded with potatoes, and in 15, 20 days they get a truck loaded with eggs. In a month or 2 months they come with peppers, and that's what you have. That's what you have to eat.
That's right. So all the beautiful Cuban recipes that people love to talk about, people in Cuba can't make the recipe because they don't have the ingredients. All right, here's the next one. In every empty refrigerator, the spirit of Fidel is still alive.
Yeah, but wait a minute. How can you have a refrigerator and go out and try to buy whatever you can find if you happen to find chicken or any other kind of meat? How are you going to preserve that? You're not going to preserve it, you're going to eat it.
I know, because
But
I
in
already talked
addition-
about the electricity only being on 3 hours a day.
In addition to that, you know, when I went there, just a little bathroom, I had to take a bucket with water and pour water on my head and then use soap. We brought
That you
in.
brought.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have soap.
Yeah. So, and then you soak yourself and with a wash towel and repeat the event several times until you get cleaned up.
They pour cups of water over your head.
And then put
They have
water
to
in
heat
your head.
they heat the water on the Bunsen burner thingy.
Yes.
Okay, because there's no hot water. So in order for you to have a hot bath, they have to heat the water
In a
on their
bucket.
little
5-gallon bucket.
yeah.
But imagine how you gonna get your soap off your body going like this, you know, and you know, I mean, you have to be an octopus.
Well, I mean, right now they have 3 hours of water a day, but that's not anything unusual. That's not anything unusual because there's oftentimes no water. There were times when we were there was no water.
We're gonna show you a picture on the faucet, kitchen faucet, and the sink, the filter of
It's
that.
not really a filter, it's a cloth.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a cloth.
that's the filter.
All right, so here's what the spirit of Fidel is still alive in. Is that every political prisoner of conscience? Yep. What's censura?
Well,
Censorship? Is that in every censorship? Censura?
of course.
And every 7-year-old child who has to stop drinking milk.
You have a child, and they allow you to have milk for that baby, but once he becomes 7 years old, you can get no more milk. And if you do get more milk, you have to buy in the black market. And if you get caught selling milk on the black market, you go to jail.
Yeah. Okay. Fidel's spirit is still alive in every old person who lives in the street.
That is correct.
And every
Every-
human who's living in inhumane conditions.
Well,
That would be everybody in town.
I mean, it's these people. What they do is just trickle down food as they please, you know. But there is so much people can take. Sometimes I wonder, these people are heroes because 62 years under the same condition. My brother, he was have some dysfunction in his stomach and end up having cancer and he have no medication to kill the pain. He dies crying. I mean, is that the utopia?
No, no. So here's some more things that Fidel is alive in. In every balcony that's fallen off the house. In every murdered martyr was a Bache.
Yeah.
He's a lot better at Spanish than I am.
Maybe. What he's talking about, potholes on a road, that's really, really bad condition.
Yeah. And every cry of liberty, and every Cuban who was reprimanded because they thought differently, and every Cuban who died in the Straits of Florida.
I've been through there.
Yeah, and every Cuban who died in Travesía, what's that?
Going across
Going across.
the Gulf of Mexico.
And every immigrant that looks for liberty and a future with dignity, and every family that's been separated, and every lágrima, that's sorrow, every sorrow of a mother whose son has been put in prison, murdered, or is far.
Well, I can say that I didn't get to the point that I got murdered, but
Almost.
but almost don't count. but I was separated. You know, there's one thing that I want to share with you. Talking about the sentiment of being homesick and loneliness, and just think about having a big family completely united. Used to having somebody with some accident, where have you, go to the hospital, the entire family goes in there because we as a country, that's the way we are. Look for each other with jealous, celoso.
Yeah, jealous.
And when I was able to come to this beautiful, wonderful country, this country adopted me and loved me, gave me a job, and gave me a future. And the American people, as a whole, have become my mom, my dad, my uncle, my sister, my grandmother. Because this is a loving country, passionate about helping others. And I have literally cried for hours along in my family, especially when they are on the verge of dying without having any access to medications. And you can't help to feel anger. And you gotta call it like it is. You feel hate. And I'm not a hateful person. I'm a grateful person, forever, to this country. They opened their arms. Not only they opened their arms, but they embraced me. They hugged me with the way they are. And I see here the thing that is happening in here. I've been expressing my feelings with people that I know, such as her. And, you know, this is not going to happen here. We are too rich, too big, too powerful. But these people are nothing but a mortal lava. You can't stop lava. Lava, even when it goes in the water, is still burning. And these people go slow and slow and slow and slow to get whatever they want until they settle down. So what is happening across the world, and the United States is within this world, is the same thing. This philosophy and ideology push and push and push and push and push. But if you don't draw a line, a boundary, they continue to push, and you go back and back, and just put your back against the wall. And that's what happened in Cuba. During all these years, decades, they continue to ravage the country, to mistreat the people verbally and physically, in all aspects you can think of. That's why people in Cuba have decided to say, no more, no más, stop.
For the most part, it's the young people. I've noticed when I've seen the demonstrations, there's a lot of young people that are out, that are in the streets, because they want to have a future. They want to have a hope and a future. And that's another thing that we need to do, is we need to pray for Cuba, because God is the only one who actually gives us a true hope and future. So why don't you have prayer for Cuba for us before we go? Can you pray for Cuba for us?
Well, I will pray for Cuba, but I'll be praying this way using the prophet Daniel chapter 9. We all across the world need to repent. And you have a man like Daniel, the prophet Daniel, in the book of Daniel chapter 9, where he began to confess all the failures, all the faults, all the crimes, all the atrocities that it was done during his time. And he continued to line up and say, we have committed iniquity. We have failed from the government all the way down to the line. We. And at the end of that chapter, Daniel, with a broken heart and spirit, he prayed to God and said, oh Lord, incline your eyes and look. Open your ears and listen, because we have committed iniquity. Forgive us. He made this clamor, including himself, a man that, based on the scripture, was a man without flaws. But even though we all do have flaws in life and failures, but you know what? We have a God that He is your strong castle. He is walls around you. He embraces you. He lifts you in the most difficult time. He has been lifting me up during this process. When I have my little sister with dengue, when I have my little brother with a problem with his lungs, when my mother died, and my father died, and all my relatives had died, I have not been able to be there with them. In here, somebody gets sick in the family, you just take a plane and go, and be there with them. And whatever the end of that life may be, you're there for them. I spent the rest of my life in this country seeing and hearing about my family dying for lack of help, from medical help condition without medication and things like that. Imagine how my heart feels. It's enough for me to feel anger and hate, but I cannot afford that because I love even my enemies. And I pray for them. I've been criticized heavily for express my feelings about people that have a different opinion than me. I have prayed for Fidel Castro's soul. Whether he repent or not, it's not up to me to decide. But I pray for leaders of the world to have God to come to their heart and change their heart. And I'm not the only one. The entire exile is going through the same, or even perhaps even more. I know what it's been through the Gulf of Mexico, where the waves are 20, 25 feet high, and you see the sky, and then you think you're going to sink in the bottom of the ocean. I've been there. I know what a concentration camp is. It's awful. It's undescribable. And I ask myself, why another human being has to be so evil? What motivates another person to do harm to another fellow man? What's the purpose? And here we have our own leaders without hesitation doing the same thing that Castro did over these 60-some years. They're a bunch of liars. when they say south is north, and when they say north is east, and vice versa, they never tell you the truth. They possess the art of manipulation. And you know what? They just don't care what you think of them. They just plain don't. So the same thing happened in Cuba is happening here. Oh, don't say that. That's awful. But as the people get beat up on the street because they think different than others, people get killed. So my plea to God is to please look down, open your ears, open your ears and embrace us and forgive us. I'm calling you today to open your heart and give your heart to Jesus.